Hi and welcome to another edition of Trader Talk TV. Today I'm joined by Neal Richter from Rubicon project. Neal,
thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You are a data scientist come CTO. Do you want to explain to everyone a little bit about how that came about and why you chose ad tech?
Sure. I started out as a trained software engineer and decided to get really geeky in AI and data science. Why I chose ad tech? I think ad tech is a fascinating area of technology because it sits at the nexus of ludicrously high scale systems, real-time systems that do tens to hundreds of billions of things per day. Machine learning, having to use a lot of data, run it through a model, have outputs that take action in real time, and economics, right? There's a lot of core economic questions in what we do in terms of designing auctions, making sure that incentives work correctly, and making sure that the buyers and sellers are getting what they want out of the platform. So it's a really great area.
Awesome. And header bidding is something relatively new. So if you can just take us through the basics and why header bidding is so exciting at the moment.
Sure. So let's start with the essential diagram of header bidding. So you've got some piece of content production technology, and this is a web page or an app of some sort, and that is triggering some piece of header bidding technology. We'll call this the header bidder wrapper or container. So the job of the header bidder wrapper is to initiate calls and parallel calls out to SSPs and exchanges. So the header bidder's first job is to call different SSPs, exchanges, potentially certain DSPs.
All at the same time?
All at the same time in parallel. If you don't do it in parallel and you end up doing it in sequence, it can cause latency problems. Now, that gets into a couple of subtle issues that we'll get into later. So it calls out to multiple exchanges and then is in charge of making an initial validation and or a decision. So at essentially phase one is essentially parallel calls, right? And then at that point at phase two, essentially the bidders are, the header bidders are essentially running their auctions. And this involves calling out to multiple DSPs in parallel and essentially running their initial auction, taking into consideration open market demand, private market demand, any deals that have been created, and essentially making a final decision and then a submission back into the header bidder wrapper. So at phase three, the header bidder wrapper is doing a validation of all this demand. And that comes in the form of ensuring that it has the right attributes, that the price is there, the advertiser has been identified, the ad tag is available. And then at phase four, essentially it's making some sort of a submission to the ad server. And this can come in a couple of flavors. One flavor is that it's essentially taking all of the valid responses from the exchanges and SSPs, mapping those to key value pairs, and then pushing them into the ad server. And we'll talk about how that impacts things next. Or what it may do is do a meta auction and essentially make a decision by running some sort of a mini auction at the level of the winners of these internal auctions. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's either submitting one or many key value pairs, and then if you think about an ad server is a simple decision mechanism based upon a waterfall. So at P1 you may have sponsorships, sponsorship ads, and at P2 you may have another set of sponsorships ads, and at P3 you'll have some direct. And it used to be that you got down to P7, P8 or below, and that was where all the SSPs happened. SSPs and exchanges were happening. And there they were running their auction. With header bidding, the auction happens before this waterfall starts. So let's say you as a seller are going to make a policy that you're still going to preserve those sponsorships. They get first crack at all the inventory, and then you're going to blend programmatic and direct. So essentially you have programmatic line item 1, programmatic line item 2, programmatic line item 3, and this is where there's some decisions to make. And ideally you pick a header bidder wrapper and technology that can help you automate this setup process. This may map to a particular SSP. This may map to the same SSP's open market demand. This may be for PMP demand so that you're able to do rough analytics within your ad server as your system of record. This one may go to SSP2's open market, etc. And you could have tens of line items. It's actually a typical technique to create one of these per price tier per exchange. So then what this creates is potentially hundreds of these programmatic line items in the ad server. So then what's happening is a submission to the ad server is a list of key value pairs. All of these line items are triggered by targeting on certain key value pairs. So the submission into the ad tag wraps around here and it lights up and activates certain line items. So let's say that SSP2 here had no open market demand, and SSP1 did have PMP demand, it had open market demand, and SSP2 did have some PMP demand, so we have a check. So no open market demand, so we have an active PMP bid, another active PMP bid, and an open market demand, and then we have direct. So then at this point, the ad server is responsible for choosing which of these takes into effect. And what you really need in a header bidder manager is something that's going to help you manage the complexity during this process and help you manage the complexity during this process.
Right. And are there any differences between how this works or how you implement this in mobile compared to desktop?
Well, in mobile, you have apps versus web. Let's see, where is the eraser? Oh, there we go. So in mobile, there are some differences. So you have the concept of a web view. In a web view, you can use JavaScript to essentially build your header bidding container, which is completely client-side, so it's running in the device. It's also possible that you can use what's called an SDK. An SDK is a piece of native code that an app such as a game would embed, and typically every exchange or SSP has their own SDK. So then this header bidder wrapper is not made of JavaScript, it's actually made of a set of native code. So the first decision is, how is your app created? Is your app a content-oriented app, which is actually created around a web view and it's serving JavaScript and HTML, and then you can install the header bidding wrapper in there? Or is it an SDK, which involves some native code? And if there's native code, what's happening is that native code is the thing that is doing the submission to the server that the SSP or exchange runs, right? And this is in, say, Java or Objective-C or whatever language you're using to build your app.
Okay. And this all seems really good, really productive, good for publishers. What can go wrong?
Well, there's a lot of technological complexity. It's a great question. So what we're doing here in some ways is creating a system that traditionally would be architected on the server side and pushing it to the client side. So one of the things you got to worry about is your user experience and your overall latency. So you have to manage the latency of each one of these connections. The header bidder wrapper really should have some server agent that's able to turn on and off exchanges to control those solicitations if one of them is, say, down or is slow or is impacting the latency. If you've got one of your SSPs which is consistently called but it's taking twice as long as the others, then you have a demand, you have sort of a latency revenue trade-off to make. And if it goes down, which is possible, you need your header bidder wrapper to notice that it's down and stop submissions so that everything works smoothly. So traditionally that's handled in a server environment with what's called essentially a connection handling object, which manages all of that. So In an SSP that is communicating with DSPs on the server side, you have all of that connection handling logic there, and it's a richer environment. With header bidding, we have to push this down to the client, and the client has more to do. So that's thing one. Complexity two that you've got to manage is this decision mechanism of whether you're going to be doing a validation of the demand, whether you're going to be doing a meta auction, and whether your decision mechanism is deal compatible. Right? Private marketplaces are such a big part of programmatic because it lets buyers and sellers directly transact with each other and gets the technology out of the way. That's the intention. So buyers and sellers are transacting. The intent, if you're the seller and I'm the buyer, is that we're going to do a deal and it's going to operate in real time. The bidder is going to bid when it's time to run the deal. You're going to make the inventory available, and that deal is supposed to take precedence in some way. So you've got to make sure that your header bidder wrapper doesn't get in the deal in the way of any deal bidding behavior and knows how to mark the bids that are deals and make sure that those are marked appropriately and mapped to the appropriate line items so that the ad server knows what to do.